I always timed my visits to the library for late mornings, when the air smelled like damp paper and the hum of the fluorescent lights was soft enough to think in. I held my coffee cup tighter than usual that Thursday, my thumb brushing the condensation as I scanned the shelves. She was already there, as if waiting, moving through the stacks with the calm certainty of someone who owned the place in a way that went beyond a title. Her hair caught the sunlight that streamed through the tall windows, and for a second, I forgot why I was here. The librarian. Mid-40s, I guessed, the kind of age that made you feel both inexperienced and painfully young at the same time. I'd seen her once before, just briefly, but it was enough to etch the shape of her voice and the quiet tilt of her head into my mind. I lingered near the entrance, pretending to look for a book, though my eyes kept flicking to her hands as she organized a row of new arrivals. She smiled, small, almost apologetic, when our eyes met. I looked away first, a nervous gesture that felt too loud in the quiet. My coffee steamed, unnoticed. "You're back early," she said, her voice low, neutral, but carrying something that made me pause mid-step. Yeah," I mumbled, adjusting the strap of my bag. "Needed some reading material." She tilted her head, not with judgment, but curiosity. "Reading material," she echoed. "Or something else?" I smiled without thinking. "Mostly reading." My voice sounded smaller than I wanted. She laughed softly, a sound that didn't draw attention but drew me in all the same. She remembered my order, black coffee, no sugar. Little things, maybe, but they made my chest tighten, and I caught myself watching the way her fingers brushed the edge of a page, deliberate, careful. I wandered through the aisles, my fingers trailing along spines like I had a reason, like I belonged. She was always there, the background of my quiet, habitual life. There was a rhythm to it, the way she paused to glance at me, the small nod when I held a book up for her to see, the way her eyes seemed to notice the unread emails still blinking on my phone even when I thought I'd hidden them well. Somewhere between a shelf of biographies and a half-empty reading table, I found myself laughing at a joke she made about the absurdity of someone asking for a book that didn't exist. My laugh caught in the silence, and she didn't look away. I hadn't realized until then how little I'd felt seen, really seen, in weeks. When I approached the counter to check out my books, she handed them over with a tilt of her chin and a smile that lingered just a fraction too long. "You came for knowledge," she said softly, almost to herself. Then she looked at me, eyes steady. "I'll give you more." I nodded, unsure if she meant the books or something else. The words settled between us, quiet but heavy, like a promise or a question I wasn't ready to answer. I left the library slower than I intended, glancing back to see her arranging another stack. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from an unknown number, "See you tomorrow." I froze. My thumb hovered over the screen. I didn't recognize the number, but my chest felt lighter, warmer, like the quiet world around me had shifted just slightly. And for a moment, walking back through the familiar streets, I felt that maybe, just maybe, something unspoken had begun. The next morning, I returned, partly out of habit, partly because I hadn't stopped thinking about the words she'd said, "I'll give you more." The library smelled the same, faintly of old paper and polish. She was at the front desk, sorting envelopes, her sleeves rolled up just enough to reveal a line of faint freckles along her forearm. I lingered near the entrance, pretending to examine a display, but my eyes found her anyway. "You came early again," she said, without looking up. Her voice was calm, but there was a subtle edge, a note that made me pause. "I couldn't sleep," I admitted. My words sounded smaller than I intended. She glanced up finally, a slow, deliberate look that made me feel like I'd been caught doing something unintentional. "Trouble sleeping, or trouble thinking?" I shrugged, unsure if she wanted honesty. "Both, I guess." She raised an eyebrow, leaning on the counter. "Guessing doesn't tell me much." For some reason, I found myself telling her anyway. I just moved here. New job. Don't know anyone. Mostly, I'm just here." My fingers fiddled with the edge of a bookmark, a nervous habit I hadn't noticed until now. She nodded, listening, really listening, in the quiet way that made the space between us feel smaller. I understand. It's lonely sometimes, she said. Her tone wasn't pitying, just honest. There was a pause, then a small confession. I moved here after my divorce. Thought I'd have more time for myself. Turns out, time doesn't feel like it does on paper. Her words landed differently than I expected. I imagined her past quietly, a life rearranged by loss. And suddenly, the age gap, the circumstance, I thought about it, but not in the way that should have stopped me. We moved toward the tea corner she kept tucked behind a low shelf. She poured us each a cup, careful not to spill, her fingers brushing mine for the briefest moment when she handed me the mug. Small sparks, unnoticed by anyone else but me. I sipped slowly, feeling the steam fog my glasses, but my eyes never left hers. We sat in silence, and it wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged. Her hands rested on the table, one thumb tracing the rim of her cup, and I caught myself imagining what it would feel like to reach across and hold her hand. I shook the thought away, telling myself it was impossible. Yet the quiet between us said otherwise. She laughed softly at something I muttered under my breath, the kind of laugh that made the room feel warmer, smaller. I returned it with a small smile, and for a heartbeat, our eyes locked. I noticed the way her lips twitched, the subtle lift of her chin. When I stood to leave, she brushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear, and our fingers met briefly as she handed me a note for a book I'd asked about yesterday. "Here," she said, voice lighter than before. "Don't lose it." I held the note longer than necessary, the paper warm against my palm. I nodded, meeting her gaze just a second too long. That small gesture, a touch of fingers, a look that lingered, felt heavier than anything we'd said aloud. And I walked out thinking, maybe some beginnings are meant to feel like a question without an answer. I found her in the same corner of the library, leaning over a stack of journals like nothing had changed, like yesterday hadn't happened. My footsteps slowed as I approached. Something in the way she held herself, just slightly tighter than usual, made me hesitate. "Morning," I said, voice quieter than I intended. She looked up, blinked. A small smile, polite, cautious. "Morning." I lingered, unsure what to do with my hands. The note from yesterday was in my pocket. I almost wanted to pull it out, read it again, but I didn't. Instead, I shuffled my feet, pretending to inspect a book. She poured 2 coffees from the thermos she kept on the side table, the steam curling between us. Our fingers brushed for a moment when she handed me one. Too long, maybe. Not long enough. My chest tightened anyway. "You're quiet today," she said. Not accusatory. Curious. Just thinking. I sipped my coffee, the warmth sharp against the cold rush of my thoughts. A lot on my mind. She tilted her head, watching me. I wanted to tell her everything. Wanted to lean in and let the pause speak for me. But then, as if on cue, the library door opened. A friend of hers, someone I hadn't met, walked in, laughing, talking too loud, breaking the fragile bubble around us. I looked down at my coffee, pretending not to notice. She stiffened, adjusting the stack of journals like nothing had happened. The moment was gone. We moved through the aisles, side by side, silent but aware. My heart kept finding little cracks, how her hand lingered on a spine, how her foot tapped once, twice, against the floor, almost a signal. I wanted to reach out. Just a small touch. But the presence of someone else loomed, the possibility of a glance, a question, a judgment. We found a table near the back, far enough to feel alone but close enough for tension to hang thick. I watched her stir her coffee slowly, stirring nothing else, the movement hypnotic. My fingers itched to trace the rim of the cup, to meet hers halfway. She glanced up, caught me watching. Eyes flicked away, then back. Something unspoken passed between us. Warning. Invitation. I couldn't tell which. I should, she started, voice soft, faltering, as if she couldn't finish the sentence. I leaned slightly forward, words caught in my throat, unsure if I should fill the silence or let it linger. For a moment, the library, the quiet, the smell of books, the half-empty room, shrunk to just the two of us. My breath hitched when she moved closer, just a fraction. Her hand, resting near mine on the table, twitched like it wanted to close the gap. And then a cough. Not hers. Someone entering the room, or maybe just my own hesitation. My hand froze halfway. Her gaze shifted, a subtle recoil, not sharp, but enough. I wanted to lean in anyway. Just an inch. Just enough to see if the air between us would change. But the world intruded. The words I didn't say hung between us. And in that suspended moment, I realized how close we were, closer than either of us had admitted. Closer than we should be. I stepped back slightly. She did too. The unspoken question lingered in the space we'd left behind, heavy and unfinished, like a page I wasn't ready to turn. The rain started just as I left the library, soft at first, misting the pavement. I didn't mind. It felt like the world had muted itself, just for me. I saw her through the front window, closing up, stacking chairs, her hair damp where a few strands had escaped her bun. I stepped outside, umbrella half folded, and she looked up. Her expression flickered, surprise, then something softer, something like relief. She tucked her hands into the pockets of her coat and started walking with me, side by side, the street glistening under the lamplight. We didn't speak at first. Just the rhythm of our steps, the soft patter of rain. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words stalled, lodged somewhere between hesitation and fear. "You seem distracted," she said finally, voice quiet. I glanced at her, caught the slight tension in her shoulders. "I guess. I just worry," I said, shaking my head. The words sounded hollow, even to me. "About things." "About," she stopped, turning to face me. Her eyes caught the streetlight, glinting wet. "About me?" she asked. I wanted to lie. I wanted to brush it off. But the truth was too heavy, lodged deep and impossible to ignore. "Yeah," I admitted, my voice barely above the rain. I don't know where I fit in your life. And I keep imagining things that shouldn't even cross my mind." Her lips parted slightly, a quiet intake of breath. She didn't step back. She didn't offer comfort either. Just stood there, letting me spill a piece of myself I hadn't intended to share. "I think about you too much," I continued, staring at the puddles forming around our shoes. "I notice little things, the way you laugh, the way you move your hands, and I feel like I shouldn't care this much." She reached up, brushing rain off her cheek. A gesture so small, so ordinary, yet it felt intimate. My chest tightened. "It's wrong," I whispered, more to myself than to her. "I know it is." And yet, she didn't answer. Just looked at me. Really looked. I wanted to lean in, to bridge the gap between fear and desire, but the hesitation, the unspoken rules between us, held me back. "I'm scared," I admitted finally, the words falling from my lips before I could stop them. "Scared that I feel too much, too fast, that I'll ruin it. Or that I've already." Her hand brushed mine, accidental or deliberate, I couldn't tell. The contact lingered, a spark that shouldn't exist, a signal that maybe she felt it too. My stomach twisted, a mix of relief and guilt, longing and restraint. We stood there, rain soaking the edges of our coats, silence filling the spaces between confessions and half-confessions. And in that moment, I realized the line had moved closer than I thought. Closer than I was ready to cross. But the gravity of it, the tension, the quiet, the exposure, made me ache in a way nothing else had. She tilted her head, watching me, waiting. And I knew, without a word, that whatever came next would change us. The next week, I didn't see her. Not at the library. Not at the corner cafe where she sometimes lingered after work. I kept telling myself she was busy, tired, or just needed space. But the quiet gnawed at me, sharper than I expected. I waited at the tea corner, my mug growing cold. I stared at the steam rising anyway, imagining her hands curling around it instead of mine. Each passing hour felt heavier, like the air itself was thicker, watching, waiting. Then a message appeared on my phone, unfamiliar, formal: "Heard you've been visiting often. Thought you should know she has complications." I froze. Complications. The word throbbed in my mind. I reread it, trying to parse it, trying to pin it down to something I could understand. Was it a past lover? A child? Something I hadn't seen? I went to the library that afternoon, heart too fast, too loud. The door was locked. The lights off. A note taped to the glass: "Closed early. Back tomorrow." Her handwriting. The curve of the letters familiar and maddening at the same time. I lingered, looking through the glass, hoping for a glimpse. Nothing. Just empty chairs, still stacks, a world paused without her. The next day, I arrived early. Too early. And she was there, but different. Guarded. Polished. Distance in her eyes I hadn't noticed before. She greeted me with a nod instead of her usual smile. I wanted to reach out. Something in me ached to bridge it. But I stopped, unsure whether the wall was hers or my own. "Busy week?" I asked, keeping my voice light, though my chest felt heavy. She glanced at me, slow, deliberate. "Yes." Things came up. Her hand moved across the counter to adjust a stack of envelopes. Not a touch meant for me, not a look. Just the ordinary motion. But it hit me like cold water. I tried to sit, but the words I had rehearsed, the small confession I almost made, died in my throat. Something was different. Tighter. We existed in the same space but in separate worlds. I left soon after, lingering at the door, half hoping she'd call me back, half knowing she wouldn't. On the walk home, I replayed every interaction from the last weeks, searching for what had shifted, what I had missed. By nightfall, I had drafted a message on my phone, fingers hovering over the keys: "Are you okay? Can we talk?" I deleted it. And then rewrote it. And deleted again. The words felt wrong, intrusive, fragile. I left the phone on the bedside table, screen dark. Empty. Waiting. Unsure. And I realized, some things weren't meant to be fixed yet. Not now. Not until she let them be. I didn't know whether the absence was punishment or protection. Only that I wanted to cross the line, but couldn't. Only that I wanted to reach for her, but wasn't allowed. The seat at the library stayed empty that day, the note still taped to the glass. And I walked past, imagining her inside, behind the stacks, watching, waiting. I found her on the park bench near the corner of the library, the late afternoon sun warming the damp leaves around us. She hadn't noticed me at first, head bent over a notebook, pen tapping lightly against the page. I lingered, letting the moment stretch, unsure if I should sit, unsure if I was allowed. When I finally spoke, my voice was softer than intended. "Mind if I?" She looked up, startled, then gave the faintest nod. Not exactly permission, but not refusal either. I sat on the edge of the bench, careful to leave a space between us, though every instinct wanted to close it. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Just the wind in the trees, the distant hum of traffic, the occasional cough from a passerby. And yet, it felt like the world had shrunk around us, holding its breath. "I've been thinking," I started, then stopped. The words felt too big for the quiet space. I traced the seam of my jeans with my fingers instead, pretending it was a distraction. She watched me, still, patient, like she was giving me room to decide what to reveal without forcing it. I wanted to tell her everything, the nights I spent imagining her smile, the half-written texts I never sent, the way my chest ached when she wasn't there. But saying it all at once would have ruined the fragile balance we'd built. Finally, I whispered, I don't want to ruin this. Her lips quirked into the faintest smile, a mixture of understanding and hesitation. She shifted closer, just an inch, and I felt the weight of the unsaid hanging between us. I know, she murmured. Her voice trembled slightly, though it was barely audible. And yet. I think I've been waiting to hear that. I swallowed hard, trying to steady the sudden heat in my chest. Then, maybe I should say it, I breathed. But I paused, words failing me again, because speaking them fully would demand more than either of us were ready for. Instead, I reached out. My hand hovered over hers, and she let it rest there without pulling away. The contact was light, almost accidental, but it carried everything we hadn't said. We stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, neither pushing, neither retreating. Just holding the possibility in our palms, fragile and heavy. Finally, she squeezed my hand once. Just once. And smiled. Not a dramatic, life-changing gesture. Just a quiet acknowledgement that we'd chosen to risk it, together, in our own small, human way. Okay, she whispered. The word hung between us, soft and sure. Not a promise, not a guarantee, just a moment of honesty, of connection. And for the first time in weeks, I exhaled fully, letting the tension melt just enough to feel like maybe, somehow, we'd found the edge of something real. The sun dipped lower, painting the park in gold and shadow. We stayed there, hand in hand, the world moving around us, and I realized some resolutions didn't need fireworks, they needed quiet courage. Weeks later, the library reopened in its usual rhythm, though some of the edges felt softer, warmer. I arrived at 8:47 a.m., coffee in hand, the same black coffee she remembered without asking, and found her already at her station, stacking books with her habitual care. I lingered at the entrance for a moment, letting her notice me before I walked over. Morning, she said, glancing up with that small smile I'd come to recognize as permission rather than greeting. Morning, I replied, and this time it felt easy. Comfortable. Not weighted with unspoken tension, not hovering on the edge of risk. Just, quiet acknowledgement. We moved through our routine, side by side, the library humming around us. I retrieved a book she recommended, and she handed it over with that faint tilt of her chin, eyes catching mine for a heartbeat longer than necessary. I felt the old ache, the thrill of being seen, but it was steadier now, softer. Less urgent. Later, we settled in the same corner where the park bench had held our near confessions. She poured tea this time, her fingers brushing mine lightly when she handed me the cup. No words. Just the warmth of the gesture. I caught myself tracing the rim, memorizing the weight, the subtle tremor of her fingers. We talked quietly about nothing and everything, the morning rain, a new title that had arrived, a memory from weeks past. Laughter threaded through it, soft, unforced. I noticed how easily she leaned into the small moments, and how natural it felt to be there, present, without pretending. Sometimes, I paused, letting my gaze drift to her hands or the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and I thought about how far we'd come. From hesitations and half-words, from missed cues and notes left unsent, to this, a shared rhythm, gentle but unmistakable. The library door opened once, and a student came in, breaking our bubble of quiet. She smiled at me briefly before attending to them, the ordinary motion grounding us in reality. I sipped my tea, warmed not by the beverage alone but by the simple, earned intimacy between us. By evening, we left together, walking past streets now familiar, past the bench where the rain had drummed against our coats. She let me hold the umbrella for both of us, and I let her walk a step closer than needed. Our hands brushed, once, then again, and we didn't pull away. I realized then that love didn't need grand declarations. It needed presence, patience, and attention to the small, mundane moments that became extraordinary simply because they were shared. As we parted that night, she turned and gave me a glance that said everything and nothing. I smiled back, and it felt like a secret between us, a language only we understood. I walked home, remembering 8:47 a.m., black coffee, a half-finished book, the weight of a hand on mine. And I felt a quiet certainty, this was enough. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. And sometimes, that's exactly what love is, a soft, steady warmth in a world that doesn't stop moving.